This happened a while ago, when I had moved into my own place for the first time. My parents had lent me money for it, so I decided to take advantage of the opportunity and move into a duplex by myself. After about a month of living there, I felt settled in and became pretty friendly with my neighbors. One morning, I went to the mailbox to pick up my bills, and I noticed that someone had broken it open. The metal lock on the back looked like it had been jimmied off or something like that. I looked inside, and my mail was there, but it was all opened and put back into ripped envelopes. I was pretty pissed, but I didn't look into it too much. Early in the morning a few days later, I had gotten up and was about to go to work. I opened my door to walk to my car when I realized I had forgotten my tablet. I walked back inside, leaving my front door wide open since I knew I would only be a second. When I walked back to the front door, I saw a man in a hoodie standing outside. I dropped my stuff and let out a little squeal. I was more surprised than anything. All I could think to do was say hello. He didn't respond. I picked up the things I had dropped and walked towards the door to speak to him when I saw he was holding a black flip knife in his hand. I screamed as loud as I could and ran into my house, not looking back. I hurried to the bathroom directly down the main hall of the house and locked myself in. I curled up on the floor and listened carefully. I could hear him walking down my hallway. I didn't know what to do, so I just continued screaming loudly, hoping someone would hear me. The great thing about living in a duplex is that your neighbors are pretty close. My closest neighbors were a married couple in the early 60s who, at the time, were just sitting down for breakfast. I didn't know this then, but apparently the husband, Bill, used to be a police officer. The couple could hear me scream faintly when I first saw the man at my door, but when I started screaming continuously at the top of my lungs, Bill knew something was wrong. He stuffed his gun under his belt just in case and headed over to my front door. You can see the bathroom from the front door, so he could immediately see the man holding a knife with his face pressed up against my bathroom door. Bill drew his gun and screamed at the man to drop his knife. I could hear all of this through the door and felt a sense of relief, but also a huge adrenaline rush. Apparently, the guy didn't take Bill seriously and decided to run at him with the knife. 3 deafening shots rang out. Until you've heard gunshots in a confined space, you do not know how loud they are. I could recognize Bill's voice from outside the bathroom, telling me to stay inside for the time being. I had never felt more relieved in my life, knowing that my trusted neighbor was there to protect me. Apparently, he had gotten 3 perfect gunshots into the intruder's shoulder, enough to stop him in his tracks. The police arrived within minutes to take the guy away in an ambulance. Apparently, he had been watching my house ever since I moved in, and was a registered sex offender. If it weren't for my neighbors, I probably wouldn't be writing this right now. This event occurred a little over a year ago, and I haven't been able to even begin getting over it. I'm a 22-year-old woman, 5'4", and at the time, I was only 21. My family and I had recently moved into a new town that was quite a bit more rural than what I was used to. Our new house was a large ranch-style home with a basement. At the time, I was home from college to visit, and my parents had left for the week to celebrate their wedding anniversary with their friends who lived a few hours away. It had been a few days since my parents left, and everything was pretty normal. They had sent me a couple Facebook messages to let me know they had arrived at their friend's house safely, and to tell me how great of a time they were having. The day was going well, and I was sure to check that I had locked all the exterior doors before the sun went down. It was around 11 p.m. I was doing my nightly routine of laying in bed and messing around on my computer, when suddenly I got this sinking feeling of dread. I felt like I was being watched. It was summer, and we didn't have AC, so I had a large box fan in the window blowing the cool night air into my room. Even though the room was stifling hot, as soon as I got that feeling, I decided it would be best to remove the fan and close the window, just in case. Once I had removed the fan, shut and locked the window, and pulled down the curtain, I felt a little bit better. However, I still couldn't shake the uneasy feeling I had. I laid back down in bed and tried to continue my internet browsing, but decided not to put my headphones back on. I'm glad I decided to do that because after a few minutes, I heard a light scratching from outside my door. Still in bed, listening carefully, I tried to pinpoint where the sound was coming from, and if it was something I recognized at all. Our new house was relatively close to our neighbors, but it was surrounded by a fair amount of forest, so I assumed it must have been an animal or someone's dog who had gotten loose. After a few minutes, the scratching stopped, and everything returned to a peaceful silence. I figured I must have been right in assuming it had been an animal and relaxed a bit. My relief was short-lived, though. A few moments later, I heard slow footsteps nearby, descending into the basement. When I heard this, I knew I was completely fucked. There was no way I could get out of the house without walking past the basement stairs. We didn't have a house phone, and I was in the process of getting a new cell phone because mine was broken beyond repair. I sat there for a few seconds, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do. I knew I would need to get out of the house as soon as possible. Depending on who was there and what they were trying to do, waiting any longer could mean an even worse fate for me. I contemplated popping the screen out of my bedroom window to jump out, but it was far enough off the ground that there was a good chance I could get hurt in the process. Not to mention that I'd be right next to the closest exterior door, so if I was too hurt to run away, the intruder would be able to get to me way too easily. I ended up deciding to very carefully and quietly open my door and peek around the corner. If the coast was clear, I would make a mad dash for the front door and sprint to my neighbor's house. I very slowly opened the door, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness of the house before peeking around the corner. What I saw made my stomach turn. As my eyes scanned the house, I noticed that something was off. I squinted hard as I looked over at the basement stairs and was able to make out the shape of a man. He wasn't just standing at the top of the stairs, though. He was fucking crawling up them like some kind of nightmare creature. I quickly backed into my room again, shutting and locking the door as quietly as I could. I didn't see him react when I had opened the door, so I figured he hadn't seen me. But there was no way I was going to try to make a run for it now. My only choice was to jump out the window. As I was unlocking the window, I heard the handle to my bedroom door turn. When the man realized it was locked, he started singing in a sickeningly sweet voice. "I know you're in there." This was followed by a loud cackle and a huge bang, which I can only imagine was the man throwing himself full force against my door. I hurriedly ripped the screen out of the window and flung myself outside. I landed wrong on my right foot and was sure I had hurt my ankle, but I couldn't think of anything other than getting as far away from the house as possible. I got up and ran as fast as I could to my neighbor's house, banging on their door in a panicked frenzy and ringing the bell over and over. As I looked over at my house while yelling for my neighbors to let me in, I swear I could see the man standing at my window, waving at me. After what felt like forever, my neighbor finally opened the door, and I burst out a rushed explanation of what was going on. They pulled me inside and called the police, and I waited with them until they arrived. The police searched my house and found that the lock to the basement had been picked, and that my bedroom door was hanging off the hinges. If I hadn't jumped out the window at that exact moment, he definitely would have gotten to me. Unfortunately, they couldn't find the man anywhere, and since I had only seen him for a split second in the dark, I couldn't provide an accurate description. I got in contact with my parents immediately, and they hurried home as the police took my statement and searched the neighborhood. But, of course, they came up with nothing. After this event, we decided to add deadbolt locks to all the doors, and my parents helped me pay to get a new phone. What really bothers me about all of this was that nothing was stolen, and there wasn't any evidence that the guy had looked through anything while he was in my house, so I can only imagine exactly what his intentions were. When I was in 8th grade, my parents separated. My mom packed us up one night, and we immediately left for my grandpa's house and never looked back. We ended up living there throughout my high school years, during which he eventually passed away, and my parents got officially divorced. My mom ended up remarrying shortly after, and we moved into the city with my stepfather, but we stayed in my grandpa's apartment until then. He lived on the first floor of the building, and the owners, an elderly couple that we were related to by marriage, lived on the second floor. The property also had a small in-law cottage out in the back where my uncle lived. For some reason that I'll never understand, there was no lock to get into the actual building if you entered through the back, just locks on the individual apartment doors on the landing. One night when I was about 15, before my grandfather died, I was coming out of the shower when I noticed our laundry bin in the bathroom was pretty full. I grabbed an armful of laundry and headed down towards the basement to get the wash started. It was pretty late at night, but I figured I might as well get the wash going and then move everything over to the dryer in the morning. I tossed the clothes on the ground and started sorting through the colors when I suddenly got hit with a horrible gut feeling. This was definitely out of the ordinary. The basement wasn't creepy at all. It was newly renovated and had almost been fully converted into its own apartment, so I didn't typically feel scared down there by myself. It was well lit and welcoming, but for some reason I can't explain, something just started to feel wrong. I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched, and found myself staring over at the saloon doors towards the only part of the basement I couldn't see in its entirety. I'm not sure why, maybe just to reassure myself that I was being a big baby, I started to walk towards that back room, but stopped myself as I reached out towards the swinging doors. As a huge horror fan, I've seen more scary movies than I can count, and I knew that if I was a character in a movie right then, I'd be yelling at myself in that moment, saying not to go into that back room. I quickly snapped my hand back and ran up the stairs, leaving the clothes behind, bursting into her apartment where I locked the doors and immediately told my mom about the awful feeling I had in the basement. Even though I'm not the type of person to scare easily, she basically rolled her eyes at me and told me to go to bed. I ended up following her orders, even though it took me a while to shake that dreadful feeling before I could fall asleep. Later that night, my bladder woke me up, and I stumbled out of my room to go to the bathroom. I didn't turn on any of the lights as I made my way down the hall. I used to wake up my grandpa, so I got used to navigating in the dark out of habit. When I got closer to the bathroom, I noticed my mom standing in her bedroom doorway, and something looked off. It took me a moment to realize that she was clutching the phone in her hand. When she noticed me, she whispered for me to get against the wall, which I did without hesitation. As the grogginess wore off and my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I slowly made out the figure of a person outside our apartment door in the unlocked landing. Every now and then, the doorknob would move, and you could hear a scratching sound on the other side. I have no idea how I managed to do what I did next, considering how scared I was. It was like someone had taken control of my body entirely. I slid down against the wall I had been clinging to and started to crawl against it in the darkness towards the kitchen. My mom looked petrified, glancing back and forth between me and the intruder at the door. She kept whispering for me to stop and go back, but I kept crawling forward, low against the wall towards the counter where we kept our butcher's block. I carefully grabbed a kitchen knife out of the block, shaking the whole time as I moved to the fridge next to the back door. I had a horrible feeling that I wasn't going to make it out alive, but there was no way I was going down without a fight. It felt like I was sitting there forever in the darkness next to the door, with my mom hiding in her bedroom across from me, just waiting, trying to figure out what to do next. But it was only a matter of minutes before I saw the lights of an approaching squad car outside. Apparently, my mom had managed to call 911 before I had woken up. I could hear a sudden commotion and the slam of the back screen bursting open as the intruder took off, running. It was 3 a.m. by then, so it was completely dark outside. We also lived right by some train tracks with thick bushes and trees, so unfortunately, it was easy for the man to escape the cop that was pursuing him. The police came in and took statements from me and my mom. My grandpa, who was partially deaf, had managed to sleep through most of the experience, until the police came through to search the apartment and make sure we were okay. The outside of the door and the doorknob were covered in deep scratches, as if someone had been going at it with a knife, trying to figure out how to get in. But that wasn't even the most horrifying part for me. In the basement, the clothes that I had brought down that night were not where I had left them. They had been thrown all around the basement, and the back room past the saloon doors was completely disheveled. All the boxes back there had been opened and thrown about. Some items were missing, and there were food wrappers all over the floor. He had been down there for a while. He had been down there looking for something to steal. And just like my intuition had been telling me, he had been down there when I went to do the laundry. Based on what we saw on the outside door, he must have been armed with a knife at the time. To this day, I can't help but think about what would have happened if I didn't listen to my gut and had walked into that room in the basement.